And just to give my own experience from that, when I was in Beijing at that time in 1999, if you turned on the TV, multiple channels around the clock, I would say 24 hours a day, had what could really only be described as propaganda marathons, where they would have show after show after show, or even the same show again and again, just drilling home the same message that these people are different, these people are dangerous, they're to be, questioned for their motives. And it really began to gradually, not at first, but gradually, I think, seep into people's minds. And so you had sons, for example, beginning to question the integrity and the motives of their fathers, mothers, beginning to be very uncomfortable with what their daughters were doing. And so people really began to question their own perceptions they had had before and to rethink their own experiences in ways that betrayed what they knew to be the case. So they really began to, in some cases, even feel hostility towards this group and this practice.
That's really tragic. And would you say that this has sort of been the way that the Chinese Communist Party has sort of treated various groups throughout its reign?
You could say this fits into a pattern of intolerance and a pattern of dis-ease that the party has showed over the course of its 5 decades of rule, going back to 1949 when the PRC was founded. It's a somewhat of an anomaly in some ways in that not since 1989 in Tiananmen Square have we had such a public display of intolerance by the party. There's been a great deal of economic opening up, reform, change, and that has made, in a sense, a lot of us felt, this is at least before 1999 when Falun Gong was banned, that we were kind of past that. The times had changed, and we kind of wanted to move beyond Tiananmen and thought we could move beyond the Tiananmen massacre. But the fact is, other groups too are still persecuted. It just tends to be a little less dramatic and a little bit quieter. And examples are Protestant Christians who worship in their own homes rather than joining official state-run churches, and same for Catholics who are loyal to Rome and the Pope. You have to join what are called, and this is a little bit amusing, but are patriotic churches, the Chinese Patriotic Catholic Church, for example. And if you don't do that, you're at great risk of being arrested, incarcerated, tortured possibly for your beliefs.
That's that's really incredible. I want to go back to something that you talked about a little earlier, which is how Falun Gong is actually very much embedded in the Chinese culture, and maybe that's the reason why it's so embraced in Taiwan today. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that I and probably many of our viewers aren't really familiar with what Falun Gong is and what it really has to do with Chinese culture.
Sure, yeah. If you ask people in Taiwan, for example, what Falun Gong is, you begin to get a good sense of how it's part of that culture. People in Taiwan will often use the word 修炼, and that means cultivation or self-cultivation. We don't have quite a perfectly analogous term in English. I think the closest thing is probably self-improvement.
Okay.
And the idea is that, and this is an idea that traces very, very far back in Chinese culture, that by means of physical exercises, similar to yoga in many ways, and including meditation, a person can, by means of these exercises and by means of cultivating a person's inner self, cultivating the mind, changing one's thoughts in positive, healthy ways, that a person can affect spiritual growth and physical transformation. And some scholars of Chinese religion refer to this as a program of bio-spiritual self-improvement. Right. And I think that's a helpful term.
Well, it seems from what you're describing that it really doesn't have anything to do with any political aspirations. It's really just about self-improvement, improving one's own self.
I would say that's right. In the case of the Falun Gong especially.
Right. So this is maybe just more of the propaganda of
I would say that if you look at the writings of the Falun Gong, especially before 1999 when the practice was banned, you will see that the teachings, and especially what people talk about, if you look at the writings and conversations people had in those especially those first 7 years before it was banned, 1999 to tracing back to 1992, that what people are talking about is, again, this moral, physical self-improvement, and you don't see conversations about politics. There's no interest in seizing political power, in affecting political change, political reform. And in fact, it's very much stipulated in the teachings of the Falun Gong that you don't get into that. That's not something this practice does. Since 1999, the practice has been, as we mentioned earlier, has been targeted by the state for elimination, and enormous human rights abuses have taken place. So what the practitioners of the Falun Gong have done in China and elsewhere, and this ties in a little bit to what we see in New York here, they've tried to raise awareness about the abuses that are happening and call for help to bring about an end to those. I think some people have thought, gee, this is really very political. Look at what they're doing. They're taking on the government. But I think that's probably a little bit of an oversimplification. And from some of the scholarship that's taking place on this, it looks carefully at this question. I think I'd say it's also probably a mischaracterization.
Well, this is all very tragic, and I would like to invite you onto the program again in the future to talk a bit more about it. But thank you so much for sharing your expertise on the Falun Gong movement in China right now, and really explaining that the Chinese communist regime has had such a history of persecuting various groups that really really are just like you and I. And thank you to our viewers for watching Asia Talk today. Be well, and we'll see you next time.